Hello. I am going to be talking about maintaining your motivation as an adult who is learning a second language. Many adults make an attempt at learning a second language, or we could say an additional language, and do not end up pursuing it long term. They may have good intentions and seek out materials, even making monetary commitments, but just not following through on these ideas. This could reflect on the amount of effort needed to learn an entire language, or the time commitment it takes to gain actual fluency in another language. It doesn't matter if this is a formal or informal learning situation, formal meaning a university course, a local library is hosting a community class, an online program you're paying to take, or an informal opportunity where you're engaging with online apps, you're doing vocab builders and grammar drills just on your own, seeking out books in this language, engaging with content creators in this language. It doesn't matter which path you're taking. Adult learners face unique challenges when compared to traditional students in like a K through 12 setting. Just to outline what we're going to talk about, we're going to have an introduction where we define some terms to make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to discuss the importance of being honest on this journey. We're going to talk about alignment, or really misalignment, and how that can impact your stores of motivation. We're going to talk about creating a social presence in the language you're trying to learn as a method of motivating yourself to continue. We're going to make some adjustments to our goals, maybe make them more realistic so that we feel fueled by our goals and not drained by them. We're going to talk about hijacking our mind's naturally produced chemicals through a system of punishment and reward. We're going to talk about the impact that feelings or emotions have on our ability to stay motivated. We're going to talk about what happens inside the mind when we combine tasks into individual systems. And lastly, we're going to discuss the power that reflection has on memory retention and intrinsic motivation. I'd like to share with you a quote on this slide. I've put a lot of words on the slides with the hopes that if you hear something you like, you can just screenshot that slide and the information you're looking for will be safe on that slide. At the end, I'll have a works cited where you can dig a little deeper into where these quotes come from. But I'll read from the top right-hand corner now. It says, "Experts and novices perform differently because experts have developed schemas by which to understand what they are doing and navigate through complexity rapidly and efficiently." Another quote I'd like to share with you comes from that same author about not being afraid to copy others. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you face a challenge. Albert Bandura, he theorized about social learning, saying that people must be willing to observe others, to know who and what to watch, to care about what they are watching, and to practice the behaviors that are then to be imitated. I think that's really worthwhile, especially when we talk about adult learning. As adults, we don't always think, should I find a role model to copy? As children, students, we do. We look to our teachers, we look to our helpers, and as adults, sometimes we forget. And the person we're looking towards might not always look like someone older and wiser. It could be an expert in a different fashion than we're used to seeing. We also should talk about what is motivation. When I learned this concept of how I now frame motivation, it was impactful on how I feel my own control has taken. This quote is right in the center towards the bottom. It says, "Motivation is the natural human capacity to direct energy in the pursuit of a goal." I like to think about this through our lens of linguistics also. If we think about distraction, what is the opposite of distraction? It's not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. So if I can think of my distracted self not as a floating, nebulous, unanchored being, but as just slightly misaligned from where I need to be, and my course of correction is just to slightly shift myself to be back on track, that really makes me feel like I have more power over my ability to focus. Another difference between adult learners and child learners is that when you are an adult, no one is going to stand over you and make sure you are completing your homework. Even if you set up systems of accountability in place, you are the only one who's ensuring those systems get set up or are maintained. Humans make choices to follow their interests, and interests stimulate people to make choices. Your own motivation is the fuel and the fire. This quote here by Miriam in the lower right-hand corner says that what is unique about adult learning is that much of it is learner-initiated. If you've made the choice to learn an additional language, I'm sure you have found this to be true. No one is forcing you to learn this additional language. It is an interest that you had, a desire that you had, that now we're having to put into motion, and sometimes to great personal struggle. The last thing I'll talk about in relation to adult learning compared to child learning is we are very familiar with this idea of you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm here to tell you that the research says that is absolutely untrue. You are not a dog. You're a human being with a complex mind, and the research tells us that age does not have a relationship to long-term memory, to the ability to learn new things in any capacity. Older adults learn just as well as young adults and as children and teenagers. From our authors here on the screen, we get another quote. Responsibility is the cornerstone of adult motivation. So while we're considering all the terms we use to discuss motivation and focus, we can also throw in responsibility. Am I behaving like an unmotivated student, or am I behaving like an irresponsible student? In my adult mind, I can address those topics very differently, one with a sense of hopelessness and one with a sense of action. It's important to highlight here that responsible learning will always involve some level of unlearning. If we're talking about a language that you were introduced to after your first language, so as a second or additional language, you used to know very little about this language, and now you know some. It's highly likely you had some misconceptions about the language or the people who use it. Don't be afraid to unlearn some of these systems and replace them with new, updated ones. It can be daunting when you are a beginner or a novice to feel that you're at the bottom of a mountain. But I have great news. The mountain is figurative. It's not literal. It's not physical exercise. You don't get more and more exhausted as you go. Instead, it's more like you gain momentum. And one day you hit a stride of knowing what works well for you, for your mind, and you're able to feed that customized learning machine you have built for yourself through these practices we'll discuss, like journals and videos, very personalized activities. You may even become so sure of your method that you wish to teach others. Make a motivation self-producing machine. Let's discuss our first step. Step 1 is being honest with yourself. There's no need to be performative when you're thinking just for yourself. And that's the fastest way to gain some traction. A question I'd like you to ask yourself is, do you love learning languages? Does the process of learning a language interest you at all? Or are you only interested in the idea of having already learned a language, already being fluent in a language, jumping straight to expert? One of those things exists only in fantasy. Then, once we have honestly answered this question, we now have a step to move forward. We can ask ourselves questions like, What about the process do I really, really enjoy? Or what about the process keeps it from being fun to me? What is stopping me from enjoying this process? If we continually maintain a mask of dishonesty with ourselves, saying, I love to learn language when it just isn't true, we can never move on to solving some of these problems. What can you change to make it so you actually enjoy the learning process? That's why being honest is step number one. I can't blame anyone for doing that. Everyone seeks out that quick reward. We might love to tell people, oh, I've started to learn French, I've started to learn Spanish. When we are at the very beginning of our journey, it is a quick dopamine hit reward. The next thing we need to be honest about is our goals. It's fun to throw out a learning idea. I am learning Spanish. But if we're not willing to be stubborn about those goals, to make those goals a reality, I have a hard time labeling those as goals at all. The next thing I want to talk about is weeding the garden. And this has to do with what we discussed about unlearning and fixing our misconceptions. You might be doing practices that are not helping you. You might be spending time on activities that are not serving you in the direction of your goal. Stop doing them. Be honest about yourself about what is working and what is a waste. On that same thread, I'd like to offer a piece of advice. Stop buying materials and start using the materials you have at hand. Now that we're in agreement, we're going to be honest with ourselves while we think about what's impacting our motivation. I'd like to ask you a question. If someone followed you for a week, would they believe you were serious about your goals? Would only watching your actions prove your goals are legitimate or disprove them? When we think about envisioning ourselves, people talk about manifesting their goals. This is what we mean. Are the things I'm doing in alignment with the person I would like to be, or the person I like to think I already am? This is why buying stuff, buying materials for your language learning journey is so tempting and so rewarding, or you could say highly motivating. This is not necessarily a profound idea. Shopping is a leisure activity. Buying stuff is not work. And yet we categorize it in our mind when we're talking about learning this subject matter as taking steps somehow towards our goal, working towards our goal. If you ask this question often and adjust until the answer is yes, you will find your actions more and more aligned with your goals. When you're practicing, or as I like to say, working, on purpose, it means you're doing things in accordance to your purpose. We've heard this concept of why, focus on your why, understand why you are attempting to learn what you're attempting to learn. And I'd like to relieve you of the idea that this has to be a profound, wholesome reason. Your why does not have to be a good reason. It just has to be a good reason to you. We have a quote here in the middle of the slide says, when adults can see what they are learning makes sense and is important according to their values and perspective, their motivation emerges. I have found this to be accurate. Another key factor in building motivation to continue learning your second language is to ensure you have a social presence in that language. You build some social capital there. If you always feel like a visitor, or worse, an intruder in that linguistic space, it is very easy to step back out of it. And then you face having to do the work to step back into it all over. If you instead live in that language, if you're a language learner, you're familiar with what I'm talking about. If you can root a part of your identity in that language, then that back and forth doesn't have to occur. Social presence indirectly supports critical thinking and directly supports creating an enjoyable and fulfilling course. Ask yourself who you know who uses this language, or who you can get introduced to who uses this language, who can listen to you and converse with you. Who is reading what you are writing? Writing is a critical form of sustainability when you are learning a language. Writing helps us engage in deliberation. Often we learn what we are thinking just in the act of writing. Ask yourself this question and remember that we agreed to be honest with ourselves. Who are you in this language? You might find it helpful to do a journaling activity where you define yourself in your first language and then define yourself differently in your additional languages. When I begin working with students, this is often where I start, making sure that their goals are accurate to what they actually want. We fall into this trap sometimes of making arbitrary goals that then don't serve our greater intentions. This is where we hit again that unlearning piece that is so prevalent in adult education. What are you working toward? What is your desired end result? Now look at what your daily method of practice looks like. Does it have anything to do with that end result? If you are practicing something incredibly diligently, but your goal is not to be proficient at that thing you're practicing, you are wasting your time. You are spending your motivation, which we have discussed is just a method of energy, just directing your focus towards something. Don't make arbitrary goals. I will do 500 words every day for this amount of days. If it doesn't serve you to be able to write 500 words really proficiently. Make micro goals and celebrate them often, but don't pick ones that are unrelated to your desired end result. We can use this method called SMART goals, which I'm sure you've been exposed to before at some point. That means your goal runs through a filter to determine if it's a quality goal or not. Is your goal specific? Is it something that can be measured? Is it something that's actually attainable? Is it relevant? And is it timely? Is there a time limit? I put a lot of value in a time limit so long as that time limit is purposeful. Here's what I mean. If you have a time frame, something like, I would like to be completely fluent in 1 year. And you can define very immeasurably what it means to be fluent. Maybe you're using the CEFR, the scale here in the corner on the left that tracks your fluency from novice to expert, or really a master in that language. Then look at what is exactly halfway to that goal. Take your goal and cut it in half. Now do the same with the time limit you've given yourself. Can you get to that halfway mark in half the time? By 6 months, will I be halfway to my goal? If not, then you're not measuring your goal accurately, and you are setting yourself up for disappointment. That disappointment is going to cost you your motivation. It's going to make it easy for you to give up because you're tricking yourself into believing you've gathered data that says your goal cannot be achieved. Your goal is achievable. You just aren't measuring it accurately. You're not putting the time to make an adjustment to your goal. Your first goal is a guess. You don't have any data yet to confirm if it can be done in that amount of time or not. We need to adjust our goals. We also need to distinguish between giving up and moving on. If a practice isn't working well, there's no shame in making an adjustment. Move past that practice in lieu of one that will actually serve your goal. Here's an example of a goal. When I can measurably perform in the language at a B2 level, if I can pass a B2 assessment test, I will take a trip to a country where my language is the first language. That is a reasonable goal. I can add a time limit to it. I can say, in the next 2 years, I will hit B2, and I will plan to take that trip. I believe this is a specific goal. It's measurable both on the scale and on my 2-year time limit. It is attainable. I think someone reasonably with diligent study could reach B2 within 2 years. It is relevant. I am gaining fluency in the language of my choice, and it is time-bound. Setting time goals can have a great impact on your motivation. Think about cleaning your house. If you are not daily motivated to deep clean your house, but yet you can miraculously perform great cleaning feats when you know that visitors are coming, when a family member is coming, and you are suddenly cleaning things you have never thought about before. You're noticing dirt you've never seen before. You're scrubbing baseboards. You're reaching up for cobwebs. That kind of fire lit underneath you is done because now the clock is ticking. So set your time goals and remember to be stubborn about them. Urgency is a powerful tool. While you're looking at your goals, make sure that you're not comparing yourself to other individuals. As an adult learner, your journey is unique to you. Compare yourself only to your old self. Review your old writings, your old journals, your old videos, your old workbooks frequently. This is an instant hit to your motivation to see how far you have come. Resist the urge to erase and correct that writing. If you're going to correct, use a different color ink. Don't delete the videos. Cherish those old mistakes and use them to watch your growth happening. You may even wish to share with others as a form of motivation for them. Using a system of punishment and reward is a method I have found success with across several mediums. Skinner theorized about reinforcement, saying that behaviors that are reinforced or rewarded are repeated. Behaviors that are ignored are extinguished. Punishment does not extinguish a behavior, but merely reduces the likelihood of its occurrence. When we ignore the days when we just don't participate in our own practice, we are ensuring that it happens again. If we reward ourselves for engaging with our practice in a way that's more tangible than just, I knew a little bit more than I knew before, we are ensuring that our desired action is repeated. That's why we should always take advantage of gamification. We should gamify our practice. But here's what we need to remember about that. Adult learning must be customized, and it's the adult's job to customize it. Do you remember we discussed no one is going to stand over you and make sure your learning takes place? As the adult learner, that is up to you. And it must be curated, individualized, customized to your mind and what works for you. That is why we see such a high failure rate on these smartphone apps, these games that are meant to fit many, many, many people. The only way that will work for you is your way. If you do the work to design a gamification that works well for you, you can utilize that system across all areas of life. My tip is to ensure your punishments and your rewards are relevant to your goal, and that both punishment and reward are in alignment with who you want to be as a language learner. Here's an example. When I'm struggling to read my textbooks, I might do what I call the ET method, the extraterrestrial method, and I will line up Reese's Pieces at the beginning of each paragraph, and as I read, when I get to that piece of candy on the page, I get to eat it. This motivates me to read several more pages than I would have otherwise if I was not participating in a self-administered game of reward. However, eating candy is not relevant to my goal of completing my textbook. My advice is to list out all of your areas of practice. You may have a grammar activity book. You may have flashcards. You may have a content creator who puts out written context, videos, produces music in the language you are trying to learn. List every way that you engage with that language, and then rank them in accordance to their desirability. Some methods of practice are very boring, are grueling, are repetitious grammatical drills. Other things are listening to very exciting music or even covers of songs that you love in your first language that now you can engage with in a different language, and you're learning vocab all the while. List your areas of practice and sort them into enjoyability categories. I do mine color-coded. I do undesirable, boring tasks in red, fun, high reward activities in green, and everything else falls into yellow. When I begin my practice, I sit down for a session of linguistic practice. I do 3-4 yellow activities. If I complete the amount of yellow activities I set out to do, I get to do a green activity. If I don't, if I fail to even sit down to practice that day, if I only make it through 2 before something else pulls me away, the next day I have to start off with a red activity. Keep it simple. This is a great opportunity to do some reflection as well. If you list out all your areas of practice, and most or all of them you would categorize as red, as undesirable activities you have to force yourself to do, this is a great time to think, am I being honest with myself? Do I like learning languages? Purposefully seek out fun ways to practice and add those to your list. My advice is to add some cultural aspects. Cultural activities make excellent rewards, and they're still in alignment with your goal of learning this language. We know that language is the embodiment of culture. If you still struggle to find enjoyable activities, think about the translation aspect of learning a language. Think of something you really, really love in your first language, and seek that out in your target language. That could be a reward. Spend some time translating or reading a translation of something you already like in your first language. This brings us to our next method of ensuring you have intrinsic motivation while learning a second language. Embracing and identifying your feelings. Feelings remind you that you actually care, and they remind you to try. During your session of practice, you might feel a whole range of emotions from beginning to end. You don't need to sit at a desk feeling elated and enthused the entire time, and it's not realistic to expect you ever will. Here's a challenge for you. The next time you sit down for a session of study, at the top of your paper, make a note of what your primary feeling is. What are you experiencing as you sit down to begin your session of practice? I am feeling sad, and I am ready to practice Korean. I have a slight stomachache. I'm hurting, and I am going to practice French. And then continue on with your practice. Acknowledge what you are feeling, and then know that the flavor of your session of practice will be influenced by that feeling. Yes, you can practice expressing yourself in your target language, like we discussed when you're building a social presence and expressing yourself. But it can also be beneficial to acknowledge that feeling in your first language, just to yourself. And once you've acknowledged it, move on with your practice. Emotions influence task engagement. That doesn't mean you can only learn when you are happy. In fact, we have our greatest, most memorable learning experiences when we are in some form of distress. We can also hijack this tool to increase the effectiveness of our learning. Do things that make you emotional in your target language. Think of a sad movie scene. Describe what happens in your target language. Try to recount a funny joke that makes sense in your first language that might not exactly line up in your second language. Lecture or teach or discuss something that really matters to you. Do you have a particularly strong political opinion? Practice showing that emotion in your second language. I promise you will remember those words. Do you have an actor that you feel is highly overrated that you cannot stand? Discuss it in your second language. I would call this a rant. The power of a rant in your second language will fuel you to gain grammar and vocabulary terms you would not have learned otherwise. This works especially in our adult language learners. Adults are invested in things that matter to them. Something else we can do is to make an effort to avoid mental fatigue. If we have a large laundry list of tasks to do, our motivation will be used towards burning through that list instead of focusing on what we actually intend to learn. Delegate your mental load. A lot of adult learning comes from not gaining new information, but from adjusting information we already know. Adult learning is connecting the established networks and the new networks in the brain. This is why gamification works. We don't think about the task as work as much as a game, and our mind already knows how to do that. Here's an example. We can connect our tasks together, and our brain will perceive them as one task instead of multiple tasks. We can latch it on to something. Again, with my example of cleaning. Many people don't feel compelled to clean their bathroom mirror or countertop regularly. I have attached that task to the task of brushing my teeth. I think of brushing my teeth and wiping down my counter and my mirror as one singular task. In the drawer with my toothbrush, I have a rag. When I take out my toothbrush while I'm brushing my teeth, I am also wiping down my mirror and my countertop. Instead of seeing this as 2 or even 3 different activities, I see it as one activity that I repeat twice daily. We can do the same thing when we are working our practice into our daily routines. Maybe you take a run. Well, maybe you could try running in Spanish. In Spanish, I am an athlete. These sort of connected neural pathways aid us in not separating out tasks and making them into more manageable, chunked together activities. And this way, we remove some friction and keep ourselves from resisting our practice. Why are some methods of practice more motivating than others? Well, some put the mental load in the wrong place. Consider tracking the days you practice on a visual calendar or by using an app. We love to track activity. You see weather blankets where people make a stitch or a quilt square that represents the weather of each day of the month. We love to track calories. We like to track our miles on our wristwatches. We like to have this data because then it can be enhanced and cataloged and cross-matched, and we can make conclusions that guide our future actions. This reserves brain energy. We are not constantly having to reevaluate how important something is because we've already predetermined. It either is a check mark in the box or it's not. The last thing I'd like to discuss is the impact of reflection on our ability to maintain what we have learned or the necessity that we repeat that same lesson. Repetitive practice does not aid our motivation. I urge you to evaluate your learning experience and to audit it thoroughly on a regular basis. We know, in adult learning especially, that reflection is critical to the learning process. Learning simply does not occur if people do not reflect on their experience. I urge you to keep a diary, a written diary, where you practice the language and your feelings about the language, as well as video recordings of yourself, both for a productive, expressive practice, as well as to document your journey as you learn this language. Here are some additional resources, should you choose to look further into some of the quotes listed on the slides. If you have other ideas about how to stay motivated, other methods of practice you would like to share, please share your ideas by commenting. I appreciate the time we spent together today.